The disease had already been diagnosed several years ago, but he had made sure that it did not garner more attention than necessary. Still, those present in the dressing rooms at the Ramones' final shows had been able to see that Joey's already battered health was on a downward spiral. The musician was weak and needed special attention before going on stage. However, none of that ordeal had reached his fans, who could see him standing in front of the microphone for almost 2 hours, immovable as he sang with his fist raised the punk anthems that had marked more than one generation. He had mentioned in multiple interviews that the records he listened to as a teenager had saved his life. Perhaps that's why, when he knew the end was near, he set out not to waste a single second and did what he knew best, isolating himself in a studio with some lyrics in a notebook. By the time he finished what would be his first solo work, he had felt slightly accomplished. It's true that he wouldn't get to see it published and on the streets, but we don't know if that mattered to him. After recording more than 30 albums, he was aware that much of the criticism tended to be indifferent to his art. What he did for himself, and for those followers who, against all odds, had founded almost a religion behind the band of which he was an essential part. By April of 2001, he had to be hospitalized, and he took it with a certain degree of resignation. The only thing he asked of those who visited him was to play his favorite songs. He didn't want to live in a silent world. At a certain point, he turned to his brother and told him that he wanted to listen to some verses that kept echoing in his head. Even though he is remembered today as the punk prince, what he asked for at that moment was a U2 song. The song in question was In a Little While, and it would be the last thing he would hear before going from being an icon to becoming a legend. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. How did this musician come to be a standard bearer for the Misfits? What was his life like in such a groundbreaking band like the Ramones? What led him to be at odds with Johnny Ramone for over 20 years? How did the relationship between the two of them end? Why did they have to operate on him when he was born? What strange condition did he have? What diseases did he suffer from when he was older? What messages did he leave on his last album? What was the last song he wanted to listen to? What did Bono, the singer of U2, do when he found out that one of his songs had been chosen by this musician he admired so much? Attempting to resolve these and other inquiries will lead us to April 15th, 2001. The day Joey Ramone died. If you like this video and want us to make more videos about the rest of the Ramones who have already passed away, write Ramones in the comments. If more than 500 people comment Ramones, we will talk about the others. And if not, we also accept suggestions for possible topics for this channel, so write down below because we read everything. Let's get started. Over the years, what would be said most about him is that he was a weirdo. Weird for having a voice too melodic for punk, weird for his exaggerated height, weird for the things he would say in front of a microphone when he was interviewed. The truth is, the weirdness that defined him as an artist was present in his life from the early days. When Jeffrey Rose Hyman was born on the 19th of May, 1951 in New York, no one imagined that they were in front of someone who would become an inspiration for musicians of the most varied genres. What they did know was that if they didn't do something soon, the little one was at fatal risk, who everyone would soon know as Joey. He was born with a teratoma on his back. A teratoma is a tumor that contains germ cells, the same ones found in an embryo. Basically, he had a fetus the size of a baseball attached to his spine that had not finished developing. In ancient times, it was believed that being born with a teratoma was a sign of witchcraft. It was believed that those born with this were cursed and doomed to live a life full of pain. Science, much more pragmatic, took care of removing this tumor, and although the operation was a success, it is equally true that a few years later, little Joey would wonder if perhaps it was true that dark forces had fallen upon him from the very moment he had been conceived. From a young age, his daily life was marred by various hardships that deprived him of a typical happy childhood. Joey attended Forest Hills High School, where his thin body, his protruding teeth, and his thick glasses opened the door to the hostile universe of bullying. At every turn of the school, he had to face everyone who laughed at him. That, in the best case scenario, At other times, he had to face the frustrated fists of those who wanted to convince him that he was worthless. Because of things like these, his grades were never the best, despite the fact that the boy had a deep intelligence and outstanding creativity. All virtues that he preferred to keep quiet for fear that they would mean new beatings in the playground. To top it off, he suffered from certain tics and compulsions that made him act in an almost erratic way, which only increased the amount of laughter around him. Things were not better at home. His parents had separated very early and he lived with a mother who ran an art gallery and barely had time for him. Thus, accustomed to loneliness, he walked among paintings of invented worlds. It was his first point of escape. He would even experiment with painting to vent all those ideas that accumulated in his brain. What were those paintings like? We don't know. What matters to us is that at a certain point, Joey put aside the brushes and put on a pair of headphones he found in the house. Back then, he discovered songs that spoke of other losers like him, of other misfit spirits, who, far from settling for the place that society wanted to give them, they dedicated themselves to singing their discontent. It was love at first sight or at first hearing, because from that moment on, music would accompany him at every step. The dream of becoming a rock star came imminently, and with it, a certain bravery. While he said he could stop feeling bad about who he was, he began to explore the most marginal corners of the neighborhood. He was looking for new records, and the recommendation of others who, like him, felt more comfortable in the dirty corners than in the sunny squares. Along with this whole universe, drugs also arrived. By that time, his health had already proven to be very weak, and infections were very common for him. Hospitals were not things that scared him, at least until he tried lysergic acid diethylamide and they had to transfer him to a psychiatric ward. There he had panic attacks and was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, paranoia, schizophrenia, and minimal brain damage. Somehow he managed to break free from the padded cell and he returned to his only safe place, the melodies that sprouted in his headphones. Ready to immerse himself in his passion, Joey devoured any influence with an unusual voracity. His broad musical taste would be showcased in an iconic album by the Ramones, entirely dedicated to making covers of classic songs from bands like the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, The Who or the Animals, among others. But there was still a long way to go before that moment. Before becoming part of the band that would catapult him to worldwide fame, Joey had other projects, such as the band Sniper, where they shone with rhythms inspired by glam. The guitarist from Sniper would later become part of Blondie. The results were not bad. In fact, they would share the stage with another band that would break records, New York Dolls. Joey had no future in the lineup for various reasons. At a certain point, despite the young man's evident talent, the rest of the members decided to kick him out for being weird. Weird to them meant ugly, even though he had let his hair grow and cover his face. Even though he now wore tight pants and shirts that harkened back to psychedelic rock, Joey seemed to be stuck in a loop. He seemed destined to remain an outcast. But understanding this didn't discourage him. It gave him a horizon. If he had to be an outcast, he would be the king of the outcasts. That's when he began to embrace his weirdness. And there was no turning back. By the mid-70s, music seemed cornered, and there were two paths that were gaining more and more strength. On one hand, bands emerged that were eager to make songs lasting over 14 minutes. It was the anti-commercial rock that prided itself on being performed by people who really knew how to play. On the other hand, disco music was enjoying unprecedented splendor. The presence of Travolta in the cinemas and all the cult linked to his dances seemed to seduce a large part of the youth who surrendered to these sweeter sounds. However, from New York and London, a new movement was beginning to take the streets. It was a movement that wanted to put the emphasis back on the violence and rawness of rock. A movement that sought to give teenagers who couldn't identify with what was playing a space to express themselves. It was a movement that many quickly described as rudimentary, but apparently it had a lot to offer. That's how punk started. It was 1974 when Joey got together with neighborhood friends of his same age, and who, above all, believed that, like him, action was needed to return to the roots. Among those friends was a boy named Douglas Colvin, who had had an unhappy childhood and premature vices in Germany. The D, as they called him, played the bass and wanted to see the world burn. This same was true for John Cummings, a hot-gestured nationalist guitarist who was tired of those shows where other guitarists would show off with virtuoso solos, which he considered nothing short of soporific. The three of them, united by the plan to go against the grain, locked themselves in a rehearsal room and saw what they were capable of doing. In that first formation, Didi took charge of leading the vocals and Joey took refuge behind the drums. After a few hours of non-stop playing, they came to two imminent conclusions. Was there chemistry between them? Yes, that was undeniable, but something was not working. For Didi, it was very difficult to sing and play at the same time. Joey was not entirely good at the drums. The solution was presented by another boy, the son of a Holocaust survivor who wanted to become a producer and manager. Thomas Erdelgert told Joey that he had to be the one to step up to the main microphone. Joey agreed. He was coming from the exposure playing against him, but giving up was not part of his repertoire. Tommy took control of the drums, and as soon as they played a song with that new distribution of the members, the magic sprouted. Tommy, who didn't want to give up his other dream, the one of being behind the consoles. He wanted to try other drummers, but his new teammates did everything they could to sabotage any of his attempts. They wanted him. And as the rehearsals went on, Tommy knew that something really novel was happening within those four walls. The songs they wrote were fast, straightforward, and talked about boys who sniffed glue and wanted to have fun. About romantic disappointments, scenes worthy of B-movies, and a desire to oppose established norms. The look of the four seemed to emphasize this. No one seemed too keen on looking like a television model. Jeans, worn sneakers, band t-shirts, and leather jackets. It was minimalism at its finest, and they felt comfortable. Thus, they were aware that without a catchy name, everything they were creating could end up being ignored by others. While they were looking for options, Didi said that he also wanted to change his own name. He had found out that Paul McCartney had spent a time signing his works as Paul Ramone, and he found that amusing. He said that he wanted everyone to call him Didi Ramone from then on. His friends laughed and played along, all adopting the same stage surname. Before they knew it, they had created the Ramones, a band that would have a career spanning over 20 years and more than 200 songs to their credit. But not only that, the Ramones brought with them a new cultural revolution in their DNA. This was later reinforced with the emergence of other bands like the Sex Pistols. Now finally the lower class boys. Those who couldn't empathize with the glamorous stars and were really angry with the system had their role models. The band's first performance didn't go as well as they had hoped. Up on the stage, they made mistakes every chance they got, missed notes, and even ended up playing different songs. They even fought in front of the audience. They sounded dirty and messy, but they were enthusiastic, and above all, Joey's oddity no longer played against him. Watching him scream and add nuances to the fast songs they played left everyone hypnotized. In a few minutes they had played more than a dozen songs. They had been scandalous and primitive, and the audience knew they had come to stay. The legendary CBGB became the club where the Ramones and a whole new movement were finally established. There, a handful of young people eagerly awaited each night to hear the iconic 1, 2, 3, 4, which marked the start of a series of simple songs usually played with chords. In fifth, the group's freshness caught the attention of a Warner subsidiary. And so, on April 23, 1976, the group's first album went on sale. The rest is history, above all, of Ramones. Would it inspire the youth? When kids discovered their material, they realized they could express themselves without extensive instrument lessons. Suddenly, the energy to create had returned to the center of the scene and was within everyone's reach. From there on, they would not stop. The Ramones' first album would take 38 years to become a gold record. Somehow, even though it seemed to have slipped into popular culture at full speed, it is equally true that their works were not prone to top rankings or receive good reviews. Very few of their songs made it to the radio. They were misunderstood, and this isolated them as much as it gave them the identity they had always wanted. While Johnny kept repeating that he wanted to earn $1 million to retire, Young, Joey knew that the only way for the Ramones not to disappear from one moment to the next was by being industrious. They devoted themselves to releasing albums, experimenting with formulas, and occasionally considering conformity while remaining outsiders. Other conflicts were added to their lyrics. They spoke ironically about the typical American family of the music industry and even spoke out against censorship. Their logo, the famous eagle with the baseball bat, was already recognized, but success continued to elude them. They had fleeting peaks, but always had to start from scratch on the next record, which in some way pushed them to be the prolific band they would become. They would even become part of the movie Rock and Roll High School from 1979, where they would end up establishing themselves as a phenomenon. In the middle there would be changes of members, addictions, disagreements, more contracts, the search for a new audience with the help of different producers and of course more and more songs. The Ramones seemed determined not to stop doing what they did better than anyone else in their own way. However, by the mid-80s, when the band was celebrating its first decade of life, there was an internal event that changed things forever. An event that had Joey and Johnny as the main characters. It was precisely during the filming of the aforementioned Rock and Roll High School that a young woman named Linda Danielle approached Joey and began to have a friendship with him. The girl had already seen the Ramones in New York, and the band's energy had captivated her. When she finally had the chance to chat with the band's singer, she discovered that her affection for the group exceeded the purely musical. Joey and she quickly got along and discovered that they had many points in common, such as their view of the world, musical tastes, and their particular sense of humor. Joy did not consider herself a particularly lucky person in love. Consequently, when she learned about Linda's situation, she faced an unfamiliar dilemma. Her surprise was enormous when she discovered that she had also fallen in love with him. The intense relationship thrived for nearly 3 years. A period of time during which Joy dedicated several of his best love songs to Linda, such as She's a Sensation. Joy and Linda also got along well, so the singer thought it appropriate to invite her on one of the band's tours. Unaware that this would end up being the kickstart to one of the most memorable love triangles in music history. On that tour, Joy spent some nights toasting with other band members and with some fans who were desperately wanting to meet their idols. The extra drinks made him return to his hotel much later than scheduled. This immediately began to bother Linda, who vented her frustrations to Johnny, who was always willing to listen to her. What follows is as terrible as it is predictable. Linda and Johnny started an affair, and at some point Joey discovered that his friend and his girlfriend were now a couple. Some stories say that at that moment Joey decided to go all out and propose to Linda. The same story says that Linda responded that she was willing to marry him if he bought her a luxurious engagement ring. The story ends by saying that Joey did not accept the extortion because he considered it frivolous, but that Linda anyway did get that ring she wanted. Johnny and Linda got married in 1984 and stayed together until the guitarist's death. With a broken heart, Joey dedicated the song Ku Klux Klan Took My Baby Away to his partner, and then stopped speaking to her. The Ramones' second decade was marked by the permanent silence between the two musicians, who never spoke again, despite sharing photo sessions, recordings, and tours. The question that usually comes up at this point is the following. Why, if Joey was so hurt by Johnny and Johnny so angry with him, neither left the band? They would give the answer over the years. Both had considered the other a problematic person with few values, but both wanted the Ramones to stay alive. For money, for pride, because they knew the project needed them? We can only speculate about it. The fact is that the drummers changed. Even Didi would leave at a certain point. But Johnny and Joey stayed there at the forefront of the new formations, always faithful to their project and never taking a feud to the public stage. Joey was never the same after that. He became a bit more withdrawn, took refuge more emphatically in some vices, and not taking care of himself soon brought consequences to his Achilles heel, which was basically his entire immune system. During those years, it became customary for him to need special assistance due to infections, falls, and health setbacks. Even so, cancelling concerts or postponing schedules was never part of his way of doing things. So once again, his personal life was buried, because of his commitment to the band and the love for music that had always been faithful to him. Around that time, Joey also showed that he could play dirty and decided that from then on each one would sign their own compositions. This move significantly decreased Johnny's royalties, despite his minimal contributions in those areas. Anyway, and as we said, the Ramones continued on their self-proclaimed road to ruin. They continued to permeate pop culture, contributing to the soundtrack of movies like Pet Sematary. In a Simpsons episode, characters perform a Spider-Man theme cover or sing Happy Birthday to Mr. Burns. Simultaneously, they realized that although filling a stadium was challenging in their homeland, they were nearly deities in Latin America. Would the Ramones end up giving 26 shows in Argentina? These shows were not exempt from police chases. They didn't take well to having so many punks gathered. And it would even happen that a group of enraged fans would tear up the entire federal capital in demand for tickets that a well-known brand had promised and then refused to deliver. The Argentine public idolized the Ramones, and Joey always showed a lot of happiness for that. However, as he believes, it was precisely while in Buenos Aires that in 1994 he would receive a devastating news over the phone. He had a lymphoma in the bone marrow, a type of cancer that affected the lymphatic system. It was never confirmed if that lymphoma was linked to the tumor that was removed at his birth, but many do not hesitate to give it. By the way, Joey knew that a countdown had fallen on him. He also knew that strength was leaving him. He knew that the Ramones and he were running out of time. What did he do then? What he always did, speed up? And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. When the Ramones announced their last tour, everyone agreed that a part of the essential history of punk was coming to an end. In New York, 4,000 people bid them farewell. In Argentina, they performed their iconic Adios Amigos to a full stadium crowd that sang and cried simultaneously. Although that concert was the official farewell in 1997, the Ramones would participate for the first and only time in their lives in a Lollapalooza. The number of guests who were at that show made it clear that the Ramones had influenced more artists than anyone could imagine. After that, the leather jackets were hung on their respective hangers and each of the Ramones went their own way. Although they were seen together again at some events that paid tribute to the group, they never collaborated with each other again. They remained connected through music and pursued other projects. Everyone except Johnny, who believed it was impossible to do anything better than what Joey had already done. On his own, he was extremely productive. He had radio shows, was always willing to help emerging groups, and even produced bands. He also recorded a solo album called Don't Worry About Me. He alternated all this with painful recovery sessions. The relapses were constant, but so was his will. At least until an accident due to the accumulated snow on the sidewalk caused him to break his hip. From there on, everything went downhill. Joey passed away on April 15, 2001, surrounded by his loved ones, while listening to a U2 song in which Bono sings. Soon this wound won't hurt anymore. He was 49 years old and Don't Worry About Me would be posthumously released. That work was like a cold shower for all the still shocked fans. A.G. Joy showed signs of devastating optimism while expressing a pain he had never shown in other compositions. With gems like the cover of What a Wonderful World, Don't Worry About Me. It was the legacy of someone whose message was always clear: never give up. Johnny Ramones was not on his deathbed and even expressed that he had no reason to regret that. However, he would go on to say that with Joey's death he had suffered a sad epiphany. Although the band had not existed for years, it was only now really dying. One of his last reflections was the following quote: "For me, it didn't officially end until Joey died. There were no Ramones without Joey. Despite being the most annoying and difficult person I've ever dealt with, he was irreplaceable. I didn't want him to die and I didn't want to play without him, despite our relationships. We were in this together and he never left, we broke up and he died. That marked the end of the Ramones, as I couldn't play without him." Johnny would die in 2004. 2 years earlier, Didi had done so, who by then was married to a fan from Argentina. In 2014, it was Tommy's turn. That year, all the founding Ramones had left this earth. In 2002, the Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. On November 30th, 2013, a street in New York City was named Joy Ramone Place. It's on the same block where the Ramones started, at the famous CBGB Club. In 2011, the United States phonographic industry recognized the band's fundamental contribution to popular music by awarding them an honorary Grammy. In February 2012, the official announcement was made for the release of Joy's second posthumous album, titled You Know, which was released on May 22nd. In the year 2021, when Netflix announced that Joy would have her own biopic produced by the platform, there was great excitement from the public. It was even known that Pete Davidson would be the protagonist and in charge of getting under the singer's skin. However, Linda, Johnny's widow, filed a lawsuit against Joy's brother for not involving her in the initial planning of the project. Being both the heirs to the band's intellectual property, the project remains suspended. When Bono found out that Joy had asked to listen to one of his songs on her deathbed, he was deeply moved. And recalling the time when as a child he had sneaked into a Ramones concert, he wrote a song titled The Miracle of Joy Ramone, which serves as the opening of Sons of Innocence, a 2014 album. The song in question talks about how often our pain can be turned into something beautiful by someone. "We can hear you," Bono tells Joey over and over again in one of the verses of his tribute. And without a doubt, that was the miracle that the boy who was always considered strange knew how to perform best. He always managed to turn all the bad in the world into a euphoric, furious, and above all, a live melody. And that's it for today's video. As I said at the beginning, if you're interested in us talking about the other Ramones who also passed away, write Ramones in the comments. There are more than 500 people, we're going to make a video about it. And if not, you can also leave suggestions for possible future videos on this channel. I'll leave some videos for you to continue the marathon. That's all for now. I'm Magnus Mephisto, and this was The Day That.